In his San Francisco penthouse office, a 68-year-old pharmaceutical mogul was about to uncover the ultimate family betrayal. What started as routine document review took a shocking turn when he discovered estate papers he didn't remember signing. Elijah Davis wasn't your typical aging executive. For 4 decades, he had built Davis Pharmaceuticals from nothing after Vietnam, known for razor-sharp instincts and unwavering integrity. When he encountered his signature giving his daughter-in-law control over his empire, he had no idea he was walking into a conspiracy. What began as suspicious paperwork would become a race against his own declining memory, and his family would never recover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Elijah Davis's penthouse office, its golden light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. At 68, he still maintained the bearing of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Shoulders squared, gray hair meticulously groomed, his weathered hands steady as they turned pages with the precision of someone accustomed to finding devils in details. Davis Pharmaceuticals, quarterly reports lay spread across his mahogany desk like battle plans, each document bearing the weight of decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of patients worldwide. Elijah had been reviewing these numbers for over an hour, his sharp eyes catching inconsistencies that would have escaped lesser minds. Revenue projections for the new cardiac medication looked promising. Manufacturing costs were down 3% from the previous quarter, the kind of steady growth that came from 4 decades of careful leadership. But it was the manila folder tucked beneath the financial statements that demanded his attention now. His estate planning documents, updated versions that James Morrison, his attorney of 15 years, had delivered just last week with apologies for the delay. Routine amendments, Morrison had called them. Nothing that changes your basic intentions, Elijah. Just some language clarifications the courts prefer these days. Elijah opened the folder with the same methodical care he brought to everything. The first few pages looked familiar. Standard legal language about assets, distributions, charitable contributions. His eyes moved down the page, following provisions he'd discussed with Morrison months ago. The company would go to David, with careful safeguards to prevent its sale or dismantling. His Pacific Heights home would remain in the family. The foundation he'd established in memory of his late wife Margaret would receive substantial funding to continue her work with veterans, healthcare. Then he saw it. A clause buried in the middle of page 7, written in the same legal terminology as everything else, but containing words that made his blood run cold. Elena Vasquez Davis, his daughter-in-law of 5 years, was listed not just as a beneficiary, but as the primary controller of Davis Pharmaceuticals' board of directors. The company he'd spent his life building, the legacy he'd crafted for David, was being handed to a woman he barely trusted to manage a household budget. Elijah's hands tightened on the document. This had to be an error. A misunderstanding. He flipped to the signature page, and there it was, his own distinctive signature, bold and confident, exactly as he'd written it thousands of times before. Dated 6 weeks ago. He had no memory of signing this document. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Elijah set the papers down carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he forgotten? Was this another episode? The early-stage dementia diagnosis from Dr. Sarah Kim echoed in his memory. A secret he'd shared with no one, not even David. Mild cognitive impairment, she'd called it. Early stages. You could have years of relatively normal function, Elijah, but we need to monitor it carefully. No, his jaw tightened with the determination that had carried him through Vietnam, through the lean years of building his company, through Margaret's long battle with cancer. He remembered every business meeting from the past 6 weeks, every decision, every signature on every document that mattered. This wasn't his failing memory. This was something else entirely. Elijah reached for his phone, his fingers finding James Morrison's direct number from muscle memory. The lawyer answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of professional courtesy and genuine warmth that had made Elijah trust him with his most important affairs. Elijah, good to hear from you. How are the quarterly numbers looking? Jim, I need to ask you about the estate documents you delivered last week. Elijah kept his voice measured, Controlled. Specifically, the provisions regarding company control. A pause. Barely perceptible, but Elijah caught it. The hesitation of a man choosing his words carefully. The provisions we discussed, of course. Making sure David has the support structure he'll need when the time comes. Elena's legal background makes her a valuable advisor for the transition period. The transition period. Elijah repeated the words slowly. Jim, I'm looking at language that gives Elena primary board control. Not advisory, not supportive. Control. Another pause, longer this time. Elijah, we went through those provisions thoroughly. You were very specific about wanting Elena to have the authority to guide the company's direction. You said David needed someone with her legal expertise to protect him from potential challenges to the succession. The words hit Elijah like accusations. Had he said that? Had he requested provisions that would essentially hand his company to Elena? The harder he tried to remember the conversation, the more uncertain he became. Doubt crept in at the edges of his consciousness, the insidious whisper that maybe, just maybe, his mind was betraying him more than he realized. Jim, I need you to send me the notes from our meetings. All of them. And I want to see the original drafts, every version that led to this final document. Of course, Elijah. Though I have to ask, is there a problem? You seemed very satisfied with the arrangements when we finalized them. Just send me the files, Jim. Today. Elijah ended the call and sat back in his leather chair, staring at the document that seemed to mock him from the desk. Outside, the San Francisco fog was beginning its evening march across the bay, swallowing the distant hills in gray silence. He'd built his office to face west specifically for this view, the daily reminder that even the strongest structures eventually vanished into mist. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Davis, your son is here with Mrs. Davis. They're on their way up. David and Elena, of course they were. Elijah glanced at his Rolex, 4:30 p.m. David's weekly check-in, a tradition that had started after Margaret's death and continued with uncomfortable regularity since Elena joined the family. What had once been genuine concern for his father's well-being now felt like surveillance. Thank you, Carol. Send them in when they arrive. Elira gathered the estate documents quickly, sliding them into his desk drawer just as the office door opened. David entered first, his shoulders carrying the slight stoop of a man who'd never quite grown into his father's shadow. At 42, he had Margaret's gentle eyes and Elijah's height, but none of the commanding presence that had built Davis Pharmaceuticals from a small biotech startup into a Fortune 500 company. Elena followed close behind, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with the precision of someone who understood the power of making an entrance. 5 years younger than David, she moved with the calculated grace of a woman who'd learned early that appearance was armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms and legal chambers. Dad, you look tired. David's voice carried genuine concern, tinged with the worry that had become his default mode when dealing with his father. You've been working too much again. I'm fine, David. Just reviewing the quarterly reports. Elijah stood to embrace his son, noting how thin David had become. Stress, perhaps. Or Elena's influence. She maintained the kind of rigid dietary control that she applied to everything else in their marriage. Elijah, you work harder than men half your age. Elena's smile was perfect, warm, concerned, absolutely convincing to anyone who didn't know how to look for the calculation behind it. David worries about you constantly, we both do. I appreciate the concern, but Davis Pharmaceuticals doesn't run itself. Elijah moved to the window, putting distance between himself and Elena's penetrating gaze. The cardiac medication trials are exceeding expectations. We should have FDA approval within 18 months. That's wonderful news, Elena said, settling into one of the leather chairs facing his desk with the confidence of someone claiming territory. Though I imagine the regulatory process will be complex. David and I were just discussing how important it will be to have experienced legal guidance during the approval phases. Elijah turned from the window, studying his daughter-in-law's face. Was there something pointed in her comment, some reference to the estate provisions that had mysteriously appeared in his will? Her expression revealed nothing, the practiced neutrality of someone trained in courtroom deception. "We have excellent legal counsel already," he said carefully. "Of course. But inside expertise can be invaluable. Someone who understands both the legal landscape and the family's long-term interests." Elena's voice remained perfectly reasonable, but Elijah caught the subtle emphasis on family's interests. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Elena's just trying to be helpful, Dad. She knows how much the company means to you." "Does she?" Elijah's question hung in the air like a challenge. "Tell me, Elena, what exactly do you think Davis Pharmaceuticals means to me?" For the first time since entering the office, Elena's composure flickered. Just for an instant, but Elijah saw it, a flash of something calculating behind her concern. "I think it means everything to you, Elijah. Your life's work, your legacy, something you want to see protected and preserved for future generations." "Protected from what?" "From the usual threats, of course. Market pressures, hostile takeovers, mismanagement." She paused, her gaze meeting his directly. "The kind of challenges that require strong leadership and clear legal authority to overcome." There it was, the subtle reference to authority, to legal control. Elijah felt the pieces clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Elena wasn't just making conversation. She was testing him, probing to see how much he knew about the changes to his will. "Strong leadership," he repeated slowly. "And who do you think should provide that leadership?" "David, of course, with the right support structure." Elena's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what family is for, isn't it? Supporting each other through difficult transitions." David looked between his father and wife, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite grasp. "Dad, is everything okay? You seem tense." Elijah studied his son's face, the genuine confusion, the worry lines that had deepened over the past year. David wasn't acting. Whatever conspiracy existed, his son was either an unwilling participant or completely unaware of Elena's machinations. The realization brought both relief and deeper concern. If David didn't know about the will changes, then Elena was operating independently, a more dangerous proposition than simple family greed. "I'm fine, son. Just tired, as you said." Elijah returned to his desk, his fingers absently straightening papers, while his mind raced through possibilities. "Actually, I've been thinking about succession planning lately, making sure all the proper safeguards are in place." Elena leaned forward slightly. "That's very wise. These things can become complicated if they're not handled properly from the beginning." "Yes," Elijah said quietly. "I'm beginning to understand just how complicated they can become." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. David updating him on his work at the company's research division, Elena offering observations about market trends and regulatory changes. Normal family business, except for the undercurrent of tension that ran beneath every exchange between Elijah and his daughter-in-law. When they finally left, Elijah waited until he heard the elevator doors close before returning to his desk drawer. He pulled out the estate documents again, this time examining them with the systematic attention he'd once applied to enemy positions in Vietnam. Every clause, every provision, every signature. The signature was definitely his, not a forgery, but genuine, which meant either his memory was failing more rapidly than Dr. Kim had suggested, or someone had managed to get him to sign documents he didn't understand. The thought of being manipulated, of his own mental decline being used against him, filled him with a cold fury that reminded him why his business rivals had learned to fear him. His phone rang. James Morrison's name appeared on the display. "Jim." "Elijah, I've reviewed your request about the meeting notes." Morrison's voice sounded strained. "I'm afraid there might be some confusion about what you're asking for. The documents we discussed were fairly straightforward, standard language for estate planning in your situation." "My situation?" "Well, you know, given your concerns about memory issues. You mentioned wanting to make sure everything was locked down legally before any cognitive decline progressed." Elijah's grip tightened on the phone. He'd never discussed his dementia diagnosis with Morrison, never mentioned memory concerns. Dr. Kim was legally bound by confidentiality, and he'd told no one else. Not David, not Elena, Not even his brother Marcus. Jim, I need to ask you directly. Who else have you discussed my estate planning with? A long pause. Only the relevant parties, of course. Elena reached out with some questions about the provisions affecting David. Standard family consultation. Elena reached out to you. Yes, she's David's wife, after all. And with her legal background, she was able to help clarify some of the more complex provisions. Very helpful, actually. She understood the implications better than most clients. Elijah closed his eyes, feeling the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Elena had contacted his lawyer. Elena had helped clarify provisions in his will. Elena, who somehow knew about his dementia diagnosis despite his careful secrecy. Jim, I want to see you tomorrow morning. First thing. And I want a complete accounting of everyone you've spoken to about my affairs. Elijah, I hope you're not questioning my professional ethics. I'm questioning everything right now. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't disappoint me. Elijah ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of his office, watching the city lights begin to sparkle below. Somewhere in his perfect life, surrounded by family and trusted advisors, a conspiracy was unfolding. Someone was manipulating his declining memory, using his own condition as a weapon against him. The question was how far it had already progressed, and whether he still had enough time and enough clarity to fight back. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a legal pad, his hand steady as he began to write. Names, dates, conversations. Everything he could remember about the past few months, documented in his own handwriting before his treacherous memory could steal it away. At the top of the page, he wrote 2 words that would guide everything that came next. Trust nobody. The war for his legacy had begun, and Elijah Davis intended to win it, even if he had to fight his own family to do it. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup the next morning, Elijah's voice still echoing from their brief phone call. 20 years of estrangement hadn't erased his ability to read his older brother's moods, and Elijah had sounded like a man preparing for war. I need to see you today, Elijah had said, his tone carrying the same steel that had once intimidated board members and competitors alike. Quietly. The old place on Pier 39. 1 o'clock. Their father's favorite restaurant. The place where they'd celebrated Davis Pharmaceuticals' first major breakthrough, back when Marcus had been Elijah's partner instead of his exile. The irony wasn't lost on him. Elijah reaching out after all these years, choosing a location that represented everything they'd built together before pride and business disagreements tore them apart. Marcus arrived early, claiming a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances. Old habits from his own military service, reinforced by years of watching his back in the biotech industry after leaving the family company. He'd built his own consulting firm from nothing, proving he didn't need the Davis name to succeed. A point of pride that had cost him his relationship with his only remaining family. Elijah appeared at exactly 1 p.m., his punctuality unchanged despite whatever crisis had prompted this meeting. He moved through the restaurant with the measured gait of someone conserving energy for battles ahead, his gray hair impeccable despite the worry lines that seemed deeper than Marcus remembered. You look like hell, Marcus said without preamble as Elijah took the seat across from him. Nice to see you too, little brother. Elijah's smile held no warmth, but Marcus caught something else in his expression. Relief, perhaps, at seeing a familiar face he might be able to trust. Thanks for coming. 20 years of silence, then a cryptic phone call. I figured someone had to be dying. Marcus studied his brother's face, noting the careful way Elijah scanned the restaurant before leaning forward. Please tell me it's not you. In a manner of speaking, it might be. Elijah kept his voice low, his businessman's instinct for privacy intact even in his distress. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you had any contact with Elena in the past year? Any conversation about the company, about succession planning, about my health? The specificity of the question sent warning signals through Marcus's mind. He'd built his reputation on reading between the lines of corporate conspiracies, and this had all the hallmarks of something serious. Elena reached out about 6 months ago. Wanted to discuss potential consulting opportunities for my firm. Said David was interested in bringing in outside expertise for some upcoming projects. Elijah's jaw tightened. What kind of projects? Regulatory compliance, transition planning. She was very vague, but she asked a lot of questions about corporate governance structures, how to ensure stability during leadership changes. I assumed you were finally thinking about retirement. And you didn't think to call me directly? Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. We haven't exactly been on speaking terms, Eli. I figured if you wanted my input, you'd ask for it yourself. Fair enough. Elijah ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Marcus remembered from their childhood when their older brother was wrestling with problems too big for his age. What else did she ask about? Your health, actually. Expressed concern about the stress you've been under. Asked if I'd noticed any changes in your clarity during our last few conversations. Marcus paused, memory crystallizing into suspicion. Except we haven't had any conversations to notice changes in. She knew that, didn't she? Now that I think about it, yes, she seemed to know exactly how long it had been since we'd spoken. Marcus leaned back in his chair, pieces clicking into place with uncomfortable precision. Eli, what's going on? Elijah glanced around the restaurant again before pulling a manila folder from his briefcase. I found this in my estate planning documents yesterday. Tell me what you see. Marcus opened the folder and found himself staring at legal provisions that made his blood run cold. 25 years in the biotech industry had taught him to recognize corporate coups when he saw them. But this was something more personal. A surgical strike designed to transfer power while maintaining the illusion of family succession. This gives Elena control of everything, he said quietly. Not just advisory authority. Actual control. Board appointments, major decisions, asset management. David gets the title, but Elena gets the power. And I apparently signed it 6 weeks ago, though I have no memory of doing so. Marcus looked up from the documents, studying his brother's face with new understanding. Eli, are you having memory problems? The question hung between them, like a diagnosis neither wanted to acknowledge. Elijah's silence stretched long enough to become an answer. Early stages, Elijah finally admitted. Dr. Sarah Kim diagnosed mild cognitive impairment 3 months ago. I haven't told anyone. Not David, not Elena, not even my closest advisors. But somehow Elena knows. She's been in contact with my lawyer, discussing my concerns about memory issues. Jesus! Marcus closed the folder, his mind racing through implications. How bad is it? Most days I'm fine. Sharp as I've ever been. But there are moments. Gaps in conversation, searching for words that should be automatic, forgetting meetings I should remember. Elijah's voice carried the weight of a man admitting his mortality. The question is whether these document changes happened during one of those episodes, or whether someone managed to manipulate the situation. Elena's a lawyer. She'd know how to exploit cognitive vulnerabilities without technically breaking any laws. Marcus felt familiar anger building, the protective instinct that had always made him ready to fight Elijah's battles, even when they weren't speaking. What do you need from me? Information. You still have contacts in the industry, connections my official channels might alert Elena to. I need to know about her background, her financial situation, any previous legal issues. And I need to know who else might be involved. You think there are others? I think Elena's too smart to attempt something this complex without backup plans. And I think my lawyer James Morrison has been compromised, whether through bribery, blackmail, or simple manipulation. Elijah leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Marcus, someone has been planning this for months, maybe longer. They've studied my condition, identified my vulnerabilities, and positioned themselves to take everything I've built. I need to know how deep this goes before I decide how to fight back. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll make some calls, quietly. But Eli, if you're right about this, Elena's not going to just walk away when she realizes you're onto her. These kinds of conspiracies tend to escalate when they're threatened. I know, that's why I'm also reaching out to Sarah Kim. If this goes legal, I'll need medical testimony about my competency levels during the time these documents were signed. Elijah gathered the papers back into the folder with careful precision. I'm also having dinner with David tonight. Just the two of us. I need to determine how much he knows about Elena's activities. And if he's involved? Elijah's expression hardened into something Marcus remembered from their father, the look of a man willing to make whatever sacrifice necessary to protect what mattered most. Then I'll have lost a son but saved a company. Davis Pharmaceuticals has employees, patients, shareholders who depend on its stability. I won't let it be destroyed by family greed. They spent another hour going through details, contact information, timelines, specific questions Marcus would pursue through his network. The conversation felt like a military briefing. Two veterans planning a campaign against an enemy who had already infiltrated their defenses. As they prepared to leave, Marcus reached across the table and gripped his brother's hand. Eli, whatever happened between us before, whatever mistakes we both made, this is bigger than our pride. I'm with you on this. I appreciate that, Marcus. More than you know. Elijah's voice carried genuine emotion for the first time during their meeting. But be careful. If Elena realizes you're helping me investigate, she might see you as a threat. Let her. Marcus stood, feeling energy he hadn't experienced in years. I've been waiting 20 years for a chance to fight beside my brother again. I'm not backing down now. They left separately, Elijah heading back to his office while Marcus walked the waterfront, his mind already cataloging the phone calls he needed to make. The investigation would require discretion, but he had contacts throughout the biotech industry who owed him favors. Elena Vasquez's background would be thoroughly examined within 48 hours. As he walked, Marcus found himself remembering the last real conversation he'd had with Elijah, the argument that had ended their partnership and fractured their family. They'd been discussing the future of Davis Pharmaceuticals, debating expansion strategies and succession planning. Marcus had pushed for broader leadership, more distributed authority. Elijah had insisted on maintaining tight control, keeping all major decisions within his direct sphere. Ironically, Elena now threatened to achieve exactly what Marcus had argued against: centralized power in the hands of someone whose priorities might not align with the company's best interests. The difference was that Marcus had wanted to strengthen the company through diversity of leadership, while Elena appeared focused on personal enrichment. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Lovely day for lunch on the pier. Hope you and Elijah enjoyed catching up. A concerned family member. Marcus stopped walking, ice forming in his stomach as he realized the implications. Elena had been watching. She knew about the meeting, knew they were investigating, knew the war had begun. He immediately called Elijah, who answered on the first ring. She knows, Marcus said without preamble. Elena knows we met. I just got a text from her. Silence on the line, then Elijah's voice, harder than steel. Then we're past the point of subtlety. Marcus, accelerate everything. I want Elena's complete background on my desk tomorrow morning, along with a full financial workup. And call Sarah Kim. Tell her I need to see her tonight, before my dinner with David. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment I found those documents. I'm going to stop being reactive and start controlling this situation. Elijah's voice carried the authority that had built an empire. Elena thinks she can manipulate a sick old man. She's about to learn that reports of my decline have been greatly exaggerated. Marcus ended the call and immediately began dialing his first contact. The investigation he'd planned to conduct over several days would now happen in hours. Elena had made a tactical error by revealing her surveillance too early. Now they knew she was watching, which meant they could feed her false information while pursuing the real investigation through channels she hadn't compromised. The war for Davis Pharmaceuticals had begun in earnest, and Marcus Davis was done being on the sidelines. The war for Davis Pharmaceuticals had begun in earnest, and Marcus Davis was done being on the sidelines. But as he ended the call with his brother and prepared to accelerate their investigation, Elijah was already 3 moves ahead, sitting in Dr. Sarah Kim's private office as the evening fog rolled across San Francisco. You look terrible, Eli. Dr. Kim's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been telling powerful men uncomfortable truths for 30 years. At 55, she maintained the crisp professionalism that had made her one of the city's most respected physicians. But her dark eyes held genuine concern as she studied her longtime patient and friend. "I feel worse than I look." Elijah settled into the leather chair across from her desk, noting how she dimmed the office lights to reduce the strain on his eyes. A small kindness that reminded him why he'd trusted her with his most guarded secret. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you discussed my diagnosis with anyone? Anyone at all?" Dr. Kim's expression hardened. "Elijah, you know I would never breach doctor-patient confidentiality. Your medical information hasn't left this office." "Not directly. But could someone have accessed my records? Could Elena have found a way to obtain information about my condition?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Elena?" Dr. Kim leaned forward, her professional demeanor shifting toward protective alertness. "Why are you asking about Elena?" Elijah pulled the estate documents from his briefcase, spreading them across her desk like evidence in a criminal trial. "Because she somehow knows about my dementia diagnosis, and she's used that knowledge to manipulate changes in my will that I don't remember making." Dr. Kim studied the documents, her medical training allowing her to quickly grasp the legal implications. "This gives her control over everything. Eli, when did you sign these?" 6 weeks ago, according to the date. But I have no memory of it. None." He watched her face carefully, looking for any sign that she might doubt his recollection. "Sarah, I need you to tell me honestly. Based on your observations over the past few months, would I have been competent to understand and authorize these provisions?" "Absolutely." Her response was immediate and definitive. "Elijah, your cognitive decline is minimal at this stage. You might forget where you put your keys, or struggle to recall a colleague's name, but complex legal and business decisions. You're as sharp as you've ever been in those areas. Then someone manipulated the situation, got me to sign documents I didn't fully understand, or created circumstances where I felt pressured to agree to provisions I would normally reject." Elijah gathered the papers back into his briefcase, his movements precise despite the tremor of anger in his hands. "The question is how they managed it, and what other manipulations I haven't discovered yet." Dr. Kim was quiet for a long moment, her physician's mind working through possibilities. "Eli, there are medications that can temporarily impair judgment or memory formation without obvious symptoms. Benzodiazepines, certain sleep aids, even some blood pressure medications in specific combinations. If someone had access to your food or drinks during the signing." "Drug me?" Elijah's voice carried the cold fury of a man who'd built an empire on trust and integrity. "Elena's a lawyer. She'd know exactly what substances could compromise my decision-making without leaving obvious traces. We could run tests, but after 6 weeks most substances would be undetectable." Dr. Kim made notes on her pad, her handwriting reflecting the urgency she felt. "However, I can provide detailed documentation of your cognitive baseline during that period. Medical records showing that your condition wouldn't have impaired your ability to understand complex legal documents. I'll need that documentation, tonight, if possible." This situation is escalating faster than I anticipated. Elijah checked his watch. 7:30 p.m. His dinner with David was scheduled for 8 o'clock, and he needed time to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of their relationship. Dr. Kim was already moving toward her computer. "I'll have a comprehensive competency assessment ready within an hour. But Eli, if Elena is capable of what you're suggesting, you need to be extremely careful. People who are willing to drug someone to manipulate legal documents are capable of much worse." "I know. That's why I'm moving quickly to document everything before she realizes how much I've uncovered." Elijah stood, feeling the weight of the coming confrontation settling across his shoulders. "Sarah, one more question. In your medical opinion, how long do I have before this condition significantly impacts my ability to fight this kind of battle?" Her expression softened with the compassion she reserved for the hardest truths. "Honestly, it varies enormously. Some patients maintain high function for years, others decline more rapidly. But stress accelerates everything, Eli. The kind of stress you're under right now could worsen your symptoms. Then I'd better win this quickly. 30 minutes later, Elijah sat across from his son at Gary Danko, the upscale restaurant where they'd celebrated David's graduation from Stanford, his wedding to Elena, every major milestone that had marked their relationship over the years. Tonight, it felt like a funeral parlor. David looked even more fragile under the restaurant's soft lighting, his face drawn with the exhaustion of a man carrying secrets too heavy for his shoulders. He'd ordered wine, unusual for someone who typically limited himself to a single glass, and was already halfway through his second pour. "You look like you haven't been sleeping," Elijah observed, keeping his tone conversational while studying his son's every reaction. "Work stress. The new product launches have been more complex than we anticipated." David avoided eye contact, focusing instead on his salmon, as if it required intense concentration to eat. "Elena thinks I should consider taking some time off. Maybe a vacation." "Elena thinks," Elijah repeated the words carefully. "What do you think, David?" "I think." David paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "I think I've been making a lot of decisions lately that don't feel like my own decisions." The admission hung between them like a confession waiting to be completed. Elijah felt his pulse quicken, recognizing the opening he'd been hoping for. "What kind of decisions?" David set down his fork, his hands trembling slightly. "Dad, can I ask you something? And can you promise me you'll answer honestly?" "Always. Are you having memory problems? Health issues you haven't told me about?" The question struck Elijah like a physical blow. David knew. Somehow, despite all his careful secrecy, his son was aware of his condition. "What makes you ask that?" Elena said. "She said she was worried about you. Said she'd noticed signs of confusion during family dinners, moments where you seemed lost or uncertain. She thought maybe we should talk to you about seeing a doctor, getting some tests done." David's voice carried genuine concern mixed with something else. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her you seemed fine to me, sharp as ever. But she kept pointing out little things. Times when you repeated yourself, or forgot details about conversations we'd had. She made me start paying attention, and once I started looking..." David trailed off, his expression pained. "Once you started looking, you saw what she wanted you to see." Elijah's voice remained calm, but his mind was racing through implications. Elena hadn't just manipulated legal documents. She'd been systematically undermining his credibility with his own son, preparing David to accept the narrative of his father's declining mental capacity. "Dad, I'm scared." David's admission came out as barely a whisper. "Elena's been talking about taking a more active role in company decisions. She says it's to protect you, to help shoulder the burden so you can focus on your health. But sometimes I feel like she's more interested in the company than in your well-being. What else has Elena been discussing with you?" David looked around the restaurant nervously, as if afraid of being overheard. "She's been asking about your estate planning, about succession arrangements. She says we need to make sure everything is legally secure in case your condition worsens. She's even suggested that maybe she should be more involved in the business side of things, given her legal background. And how do you feel about that?" Terrified. The word came out with the force of a long-held secret finally being released. "Dad, I love Elena, but I don't trust her judgment when it comes to the company. She doesn't understand what Davis Pharmaceuticals means to our family, to the employees, to the patients who depend on our medications. Sometimes I think she sees it as just another asset to be managed." Elijah felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that his son wasn't complicit in Elena's conspiracy. Heartbreak that David was trapped in a marriage that was destroying him from the inside. "David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." For the next 20 minutes, Elijah laid out everything he'd discovered. The suspicious will changes, Elena's contact with Morrison, her knowledge of his diagnosis, the systematic manipulation he'd uncovered. He watched his son's face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally a terrible understanding. "She drugged you," David said quietly, his voice hollow with realization. "That dinner 6 weeks ago, when Morrison came to the house. Elena insisted on cooking, Said she wanted to make a good impression. You seemed tired that night, kept rubbing your temples like you had a headache. I thought you were just working too hard. You remember Morrison coming to the house? Elena said he needed your signature on some routine documents, something that couldn't wait until your next office meeting. She was very specific about wanting to handle all the details herself. Setting up the meeting, preparing the documents, making sure you were comfortable. David's hands were shaking now, the full scope of his wife's deception becoming clear. God, Dad, what kind of person does something like that? The kind of person who sees opportunity where others see tragedy. The kind of person who views family as a means to an end. Elijah reached across the table and gripped his son's hand. David, I need to know. Are you willing to help me fight this? What do you need me to do? For now, nothing. Go home, act normal. Don't let Elena suspect that you know anything about our conversation tonight. Can you do that? David nodded, but his expression remained haunted. Dad, what if she finds out? What if she realizes we're onto her? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, but David, I need you to understand something. Elena's not going to just walk away from this. She's invested too much, risked too much to give up easily. This is going to get worse before it gets better. What do you mean? Elijah thought about Dr. Kim's warnings, about Marcus's concerns, about the text message that proved Elena was already monitoring their activities. I mean that people who are willing to drug someone to steal their legacy are capable of almost anything. We need to be very careful, and we need to move quickly. They finished dinner in relative silence, both men lost in the implications of what they'd discussed. As they prepared to leave, David gripped his father's arm. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known. Elena's very good at what she does. But David, remember, she's been manipulating you too. The guilt you're feeling, the self-doubt, the fear that you're not capable of running the company, those aren't your natural feelings. They're the result of systematic psychological manipulation. David's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for months. How do we stop her? We gather evidence. We document everything. And we prepare for war. Elijah's voice carried the steel that had built Davis Pharmaceuticals from nothing. Because, make no mistake, son, that's exactly what this is. As they left the restaurant separately, another precaution against Elena's surveillance, Elijah felt the familiar weight of command settling across his shoulders. The investigation phase was ending. Soon he would have to move from gathering intelligence to taking action. And he suspected that Elena Vasquez had no idea just how dangerous a cornered veteran could become. Elijah woke at 5:30 a.m. the next morning with the clarity that often followed his most restless nights. The fog outside his Pacific Heights mansion was still thick, but his mind cut through the uncertainty with surgical precision. Today would be the day he stopped playing defense. Isabella Rodriguez found him in the kitchen at 6, already dressed in his best suit, and reviewing documents at the breakfast table. In her 15 years of working for the Davis family, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of her employer's moods. Today, something was different. Dangerous. Mr. Davis, you're up early, she said quietly, setting his coffee exactly as he preferred it. Black, no sugar, in the ceramic mug Margaret had given him for their 20th anniversary. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Elijah looked up from his papers, studying Isabella's weathered face. At 62, she moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone who saw everything, but spoke only when necessary. Isabella, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, her dark eyes alert. 6 weeks ago, when Mr. Morrison came to dinner. Do you remember that evening? Isabella's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, sir. Mrs. Elena was very specific about the meal. Wanted to cook it herself. Said it was important that everything be perfect. Did you notice anything unusual about my behavior that night? Anything at all? Isabella glanced toward the kitchen door, ensuring they were alone. You seemed tired, sir. More than usual. And you kept rubbing your temples, like you had a headache. Mrs. Elena kept insisting you drink more wine, said it would help you relax. Elijah's jaw tightened. What else do you remember? After dinner, you went to your study with Mr. Morrison. Mrs. Elena made sure I was busy cleaning in the kitchen, but…" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I heard raised voices. "Not angry, exactly. But you sounded confused, sir. Like you were asking the same questions more than once." "And Elena?" "She kept bringing you coffee. Said the documents were complex and you needed to stay alert. But you seemed to get more tired, not more awake." Isabella's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mr. Davis, I should have said something. You did nothing wrong, Isabella, nothing at all." Elijah reached across and patted her hand gently. "But I need you to write down everything you remember about that evening. Every detail, no matter how small. Can you do that for me?" "Of course, sir. But, Mr. Davis, are you in some kind of trouble?" Before Elijah could answer, the sound of a key in the front door echoed through the house. David's voice called out from the foyer, strained with barely controlled panic. "Dad? Dad? Where are you?" Elijah found his son pacing in the living room, his usually neat appearance disheveled. David's hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and his hands shook as he turned to face his father. "She knows," David said without preamble. "Elena knows that we talked last night." "How?" "I don't know. I tried to act normal when I got home, but she was waiting up for me. Started asking questions about dinner, about what we discussed. I told her it was just business, but she kept pushing." David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to his father's that Elijah felt a pang of recognition. "Dad, she's not the same person I married. Last night when she was questioning me, there was something in her eyes. Something cold." "What exactly did she say?" "She asked if you seemed confused during dinner, if you mentioned any concerns about your health or your memory. When I said no, she accused me of lying. Said she knew you'd been asking questions about estate planning, about the will." David's voice cracked slightly. "She knows we're onto her, Dad. And I think she's planning something." Elijah moved to his desk and pulled out the folder Marcus had delivered that morning. His brother had worked through the night, calling in favors and accessing databases that revealed Elena Vasquez's carefully hidden history. "David, I want you to look at this. Really look at it." The documents Marcus had compiled painted a picture that was worse than Elijah had imagined. Elena's law school transcripts showed a pattern of academic dishonesty, plagiarism accusations that had been quietly resolved through administrative channels. Her first law firm had let her go after financial irregularities in client accounts. 2 previous relationships had ended with restraining orders filed by partners who accused her of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. Most damning of all was the credit report showing debts of over $2 million, failed business ventures, maxed out credit cards, and loans from sources that Marcus's contacts described as questionable. "My God," David whispered, staring at the evidence of his wife's deception. "How did I not see this? How was I so blind?" "Because she's very good at what she does. And because you loved her." Elijah's voice carried no judgment, only the sadness of a father watching his son confront a devastating truth. "The question now is what we do about it. We take this to the police, show them the evidence, have her arrested for fraud. It's not that simple, David. She hasn't technically broken any laws yet. The will changes appear legitimate. I did sign them, even if I was manipulated into doing so. And unless we can prove she drugged me, which would be nearly impossible after 6 weeks." David sank into a chair, the full weight of their situation settling across his shoulders. "So she wins. She gets everything, and we can't stop her." "No," Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying the steel that had built an empire. "She doesn't win, because there's one thing Elena doesn't understand about the Davis family." "What's that?" "We don't surrender. Ever." Elijah picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Marcus? It's time. Bring everything you have to the house. Now." As he ended the call, Elijah looked at his son with the same determination that had carried him through Vietnam, through the lean years of building his company, through every battle he'd ever fought. "David, Elena thinks she's manipulated a sick old man and his weak son. She's about to learn that she's actually declared war on a family that's been fighting battles longer than she's been alive. The confrontation Elena had been preparing for was coming, But she had no idea that the prey she'd been stalking was about to become the hunter. The confrontation Elena had been preparing for was coming, but she had no idea that the prey she'd been stalking was about to become the hunter. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes, carrying 2 briefcases and wearing the grim expression of a man who'd spent the night uncovering ugly truths. He'd brought reinforcements, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "This is Catherine Walsh," Marcus said without preamble. "Former FBI Financial Crimes Unit, now private investigator. She's the one who dug up Elena's real history." Catherine Walsh set her laptop on Elijah's desk with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Davis, your daughter-in-law is more dangerous than you realize." The restraining orders were just the beginning. She pulled up a series of photographs on her screen, bank statements, court documents, police reports from 3 different states. "Elena Vasquez has been running the same con for 15 years. She targets wealthy older men, gains their trust through younger family members, then systematically drains their assets. Your situation follows her exact pattern." David stared at the evidence with growing horror. "There were others before me?" "3 that we can document. A pharmaceutical executive in Denver. She married his son and convinced the father to restructure his will during what the family later claimed was early-stage dementia. A tech entrepreneur in Seattle. Similar pattern, except he died in a car accident before he could change the will back." Elijah's blood ran cold. "An accident? Single-car collision on a rainy night. No witnesses." Elena inherited everything through her husband, who was too devastated to question the circumstances. Catherine's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen too many cases like this. The 3rd victim was smarter. He figured out what she was doing and tried to expose her. Elena disappeared with $500,000 in liquidated assets before charges could be filed. Why wasn't she prosecuted? No jurisdiction wanted to take the case. She'd moved between states, used different legal names, and her victims' families often preferred quiet settlements to public trials. Catherine leaned back in her chair. "Elena Vasquez is a professional predator, Mr. Davis, and you and your son are her biggest target yet." Marcus pulled out his own folder. "It gets worse. Elena's been in contact with at least 6 law firms over the past month, all specializing in competency proceedings. She's been researching how to have someone declared mentally incompetent in California. She's planning to have me committed," Elijah said quietly, the full scope of Elena's strategy becoming clear. "Get me declared incompetent, take control as David's legal advisor, then liquidate everything she can before anyone realizes what's happened." David's face had gone pale. "Dad, we have to call the police. Now. Before she what?" Elena's voice cut through the room like ice. Everyone turned to see her standing in the doorway, her perfectly composed expression not quite hiding the calculation in her dark eyes. She'd let herself in through the back entrance, using the key David had given her months ago. Now she stood there in her tailored black suit, looking like an attorney who'd arrived for a hostile deposition. "Elena." David's voice cracked with the weight of his shattered illusions. "How long have you been listening?" "Long enough." She stepped into the room with the confidence of someone who'd been planning for this moment. "Long enough to realize that my dear family has been conducting their own little investigation." Catherine Walsh's hand moved subtly toward her purse, but Elena noticed the gesture and smiled coldly. "Ms. Walsh, I presume? Former FBI, now working as a private investigator. Your reputation precedes you." Her gaze swept across the assembled group with predatory assessment. "Though I have to say, I'm disappointed in all of you. Did you really think I wouldn't be monitoring the situation?" Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring. "Elena, you need to leave. Now." "I don't think so, Marcus. You see, I've spent considerable time and money positioning myself for this moment, and I'm not about to let a family reunion derail my plans." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "In fact, I think it's time we discussed the terms of our new arrangement." "What arrangement?" Elijah's voice carried the steel that had intimidated boardrooms full of executives. "The one where you transfer control of Davis Pharmaceuticals to me immediately, or I make some very unfortunate phone calls." Elena's smile widened, revealing the predator beneath the polished exterior. "You see, Elijah, while you've been playing detective, I've been making arrangements of my own, arrangements that could be very damaging to your reputation and your company." She held up her phone, showing a contact list that made Elijah's stomach turn. Financial regulators, FDA investigators, Securities and Exchange Commission officials, journalists who specialized in corporate malfeasance. Amazing how interested people become when they hear about a pharmaceutical CEO making major business decisions while suffering from dementia. Especially when there are questions about clinical trial data that might have been compromised by someone who wasn't mentally competent to oversee the research. David found his voice, though it shook with rage. "You're threatening to destroy Dad's life's work. Thousands of people depend on those medications. Thousands of people will continue to depend on them, David. They'll just be depending on me to make sure the company runs properly." Elena's tone remained perfectly reasonable, as if she were discussing quarterly projections rather than extortion. "I'm not unreasonable. Elijah can retain an honorary position, suitable for someone in his condition. But real control needs to be in competent hands." Catherine Walsh stood slowly, her hand now openly resting on her purse. "Elena Vasquez, or should I say Elena Martinez, Elena Steele, or any of the other names you've used over the past decade." Elena's composure flickered for just an instant. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else. The Denver pharmaceutical executive who died of a supposed heart attack after changing his will? The Seattle tech founder whose car accident was so conveniently timed? The Boston venture capitalist who disappeared before he could testify against you?" Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone presenting evidence to a jury. "We know who you are, Elena. We know what you've done. And we have enough evidence to put you away for the rest of your life. Evidence that would take months to present in court. Evidence that could be complicated by questions about the mental competency of your primary witness." Elena gestured toward Elijah with theatrical sympathy. Poor Elijah, suffering from advancing dementia, becoming paranoid, making wild accusations against his loving daughter-in-law who was only trying to help. The room fell silent, as everyone realized the terrible trap Elena had laid. She could destroy Elijah's reputation and his company with a few phone calls, while simultaneously discrediting him as a witness against her. It was brilliant, ruthless, and completely legal. Elijah looked at his son, seeing his own determination reflected in David's face. Then he turned back to Elena, with the cold smile of a man who'd been underestimated once too often. "Elena," he said quietly, "you've made one critical error in your calculations." "And what's that?" "You assumed I was fighting to save myself. But I'm not fighting for me anymore. I'm fighting for my son, my company, and every patient who depends on the medications we develop." His voice carried the quiet authority that had built an empire from nothing. "And that makes me far more dangerous than you could possibly imagine." Elena's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering in her eyes for the first time since she'd entered the room. Marcus stepped forward, his own expression hardening with resolve. "Elena, you should know that everything you've said in this room has been recorded. Audio and video. Multiple backup systems." He gestured toward devices Catherine had discreetly placed around the room during their meeting. "Your threats, your extortion attempts, your admission of manipulating legal documents, all of it. That's inadmissible without consent." "Actually," Catherine interrupted, "California is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation agrees to the recording, it's perfectly legal. And Mr. Davis has been very cooperative." Elena's composure cracked completely. "You can't prove anything. I haven't done anything illegal. The will changes were legitimate. Elijah signed them himself. Quote, under the influence of substances you administered without his knowledge," David said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Isabella witnessed everything that night. Your insistence on cooking the meal, the wine you kept pushing, the coffee that made him more tired instead of alert. A housekeeper's testimony against a licensed attorney? No court would. What about a pharmaceutical analysis of the wine glasses from that evening?" Catherine pulled out another folder, her expression professionally neutral. "Isabella saved everything from that dinner, Elena. The glasses, the plates, even the coffee cups. 20 years of cleaning up after powerful people taught her to be very thorough about preserving evidence. Elena's face went white. That's impossible. It's been 6 weeks. Long enough for most substances to metabolize in a human body. Not long enough for traces to disappear from glassware that was properly preserved. Catherine's voice carried the weight of someone who'd built cases on exactly this kind of evidence. We found rohypnol residue, Elena, date rape drug. Administered in precisely the right dosage to cause confusion and memory impairment without rendering someone unconscious. You drugged me, Elijah said quietly, the full reality of Elena's betrayal settling over him like ice. You drugged me in my own home, manipulated me into signing away everything I've built, and then spent weeks gaslighting my son into believing I was losing my mind. Elena backed toward the door, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. You don't understand. I needed that money. I have debts, obligations, people who will hurt me if I don't pay them back. So you decided to hurt us instead, David said, his voice heavy with the pain of shattered trust. You married me to get to my father's fortune. Everything between us was a lie. Not everything, Elena whispered, but even she seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. Yes, Elijah said with finality. Everything. Catherine was already on her phone, speaking in low tones to someone who was clearly law enforcement. Elena heard the word arrest and made a desperate lunge toward the door, but Marcus moved to block her path. Don't make this worse than it already is, he said quietly. Face this with whatever dignity you have left. Elena's shoulders sagged as the weight of her collapsed conspiracy finally settled on her. The predator who had stalked the Davis family for months was finally cornered, with nowhere left to run and no more lies left to tell. The war for Davis Pharmaceuticals was over. Elena Vasquez had lost. Any laws yet? The will changes appear legitimate. I did sign them, even if I was manipulated into doing so. And unless we can prove she drugged me, which would be nearly impossible after 6 weeks. David sank into a chair, the full weight of their situation settling across his shoulders. So she wins. She gets everything, and we can't stop her. No, Elijah said quietly, his voice carrying the steel that had built an empire. She doesn't win. Because there's one thing Elena doesn't understand about the Davis family. What's that? We don't surrender. Ever. Elijah picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Marcus, it's time. Bring everything you have to the house. Now. As he ended the call, Elijah looked at his son with the same determination that had carried him through Vietnam, through the lean years of building his company, through every battle he'd ever fought. David, Elena thinks she's manipulated a sick old man and his weak son. She's about to learn that she's actually declared war on a family that's been fighting battles longer than she's been alive. The confrontation Elena had been preparing for was coming. But she had no idea that the prey she'd been stalking was about to become the hunter. Elena's desperation reached dangerous levels as her carefully constructed scheme unraveled. She attempted to bribe Dr. Kim with threats about her medical license, but the physician refused to falsify Elijah's competency records. When intimidation failed with Marcus, Elena's mask completely slipped, revealing her true ruthless nature. During a family dinner, Elijah suffered a severe memory episode, forgetting where he was for nearly 10 minutes. But when clarity returned, he remembered crucial details about Elena's late-night phone calls and suspicious meetings. Evidence surfaced revealing Elena's previous bankruptcy and fraudulent business dealings. David finally began seeing his wife's true nature when she coldly discussed eliminating obstacles to their financial security. That evening, Elijah's car brakes mysteriously failed. The brake failure had been a wake-up call that nearly became a final call. Elijah's hands still trembled slightly as he sat in Marcus's kitchen 3 days later, the bandage on his forehead, a reminder of how close he'd come to becoming another elderly accident statistic. The mechanic had been clear. The brake lines hadn't worn through naturally. Someone had deliberately compromised them. She's escalating, Marcus said, pouring coffee with hands that weren't entirely steady either. The realization that his brother had nearly died while he'd been safely analyzing financial records had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Elena knows we're closing in, and now she's willing to kill for this. Elijah nodded, though the motion sent a spike of pain through his skull. The concussion from the crash had temporarily worsened his confusion, but it had also crystallized something essential. He was running out of time, and not just because of his condition. We need Morrison's testimony. He's the only one who can definitively prove the forgery. As if summoned by their conversation, the doorbell rang. Marcus tensed, but Elijah held up a calming hand. "I'm expecting someone." James Morrison stood on the doorstep looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his bloodshot eyes darted nervously around the quiet residential street. When he saw Elijah's bandaged face, whatever remained of his composure crumbled. "Jesus Christ, Elijah! When I heard about the accident—" "I know it wasn't an accident." His voice cracked. "This has gone too far. Way too far." Marcus stepped protectively closer to his brother. "How do we know you're not here to finish what she started?" Morrison's laugh was bitter, desperate. "Because I'm the one who called you yesterday, remember? I'm the one who's been leaving anonymous tips with your private investigator." He looked directly at Elijah. "I'm the one who's been trying to find the courage to tell you the truth for 2 months." They settled in Marcus's living room, Morrison perched on the edge of the couch like a man ready to flee at any moment. Isabella Rodriguez sat quietly in the corner, her presence both comforting and strategically important. Elijah had learned to value witnesses to every conversation these days. "Start from the beginning," Elijah said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "All of it." Morrison's hands shook as he began. "It started 6 months ago. Elena came to my office, said she was concerned about your mental state. She had documentation. Photos of you looking confused at family gatherings. Recordings of phone conversations where you seemed disoriented. She painted a picture of a man whose condition was deteriorating faster than anyone realized." "Fabricated evidence," Marcus growled. "I know that now," Morrison said miserably. "But at the time it seemed genuine. She was so convincing, so concerned. She said David was too emotionally compromised to see how bad things were getting, that someone needed to take action to protect your legacy before you made decisions that would destroy everything you'd built." Elijah felt a cold recognition. Elena's psychological manipulation had been masterful, exploiting not just Morrison's weakness, but his genuine affection for the Davis family. "She offered to help, I assume. She said if we could create updated estate documents that reflected your true wishes, securing the company's future under competent leadership, it would be a kindness to everyone involved, including you." Morrison's voice dropped to a whisper. "She had me convinced that I was protecting you from yourself. And your gambling debts?" Marcus's tone was steel. "Were those protecting someone too?" Morrison flinched as if slapped. "She knew. Somehow she knew about the debts, about the loan sharks. She said she could make them disappear if I helped her. 24 hours later, my debts were cleared. $200,000. Just gone." Isabella spoke for the first time, her accented voice carrying quiet strength. "She watches everyone, Senor Morrison. She learns their secrets, their weaknesses. She has done this before, in her previous marriages." All eyes turned to the housekeeper. Elijah had suspected Isabella knew more than she'd initially revealed, but this was the first concrete evidence of Elena's pattern of behavior. "Previous marriages?" Marcus leaned forward. "Elena told us she'd never been married before David." Isabella's expression was grim. 2 husbands, both older, both wealthy. Both died in accidents after changing their wills. The first one, his family contested and won. She got nothing. The second time, she was smarter. Made sure there was no family to contest. The room fell silent except for Morrison's ragged breathing. Finally, he found his voice. "I have copies of everything. The original documents Elena provided, the forged signatures, records of the money transfers. I kept it all thinking. I don't know what I was thinking." Maybe that I'd need protection someday. Where are they? Elijah asked. Safety deposit box. Bank of America on Market Street. Morrison reached into his jacket and produced a key. Box 1247. You'll need this. And my authorization letter. As Morrison wrote out the authorization, Isabella continued her revelations. She has been recording phone calls, Senor Elijah. Your calls with Senor David, with Dr. Kim, even with Senor Marcus. She plans to use them to show your, mental decline. But I've been careful about what I say on the phone, Elijah protested. She edits them, Isabella explained. Takes pieces from different conversations, makes them sound like confusion when they were not. I have seen her doing this on her computer. Marcus stood and began pacing, his businessman's mind processing the implications. This is conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted murder. We have enough to put her away for decades. If we can prove it, Elijah said quietly, if my testimony is believed over hers, if a jury doesn't see a confused old man trying to deny his own signature on legal documents. Morrison cleared his throat. There's something else. Elena has been building a case for your incompetency hearing. She has scheduled medical evaluations with doctors who specialize in finding cognitive decline. She's been coaching David on testimony about your supposed deterioration. The betrayal cut deep, but it no longer surprised Elijah. His son had chosen his path. When is the hearing? Next week. She moved it up after the accident. She's claiming you've become a danger to yourself and others. Elijah looked around the room at the faces of people who had risked everything to help him. Marcus, who had put aside years of estrangement. Isabella, who could lose her job and more. Morrison, who was confessing to crimes that could destroy his career. Dr. Kim, who had risked her medical license by refusing to falsify his records. These were his real family, not the son who had betrayed him, or the daughter-in-law who wanted him dead, but the people who had chosen to stand by him when everything was at stake. Then we end this, he said, his voice carrying the steel that had built an empire. We gather every piece of evidence, every recording, every document. We prepare for that hearing like it's the most important trial of our lives. Because it is. Morrison nodded, some of his old professional demeanor returning. I'll testify to everything. The bribery, the forgery, all of it. My career is over anyway, but maybe I can salvage what's left of my soul. As the group began planning their strategy, Elijah felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Elena had underestimated the loyalty she was fighting against, the bonds forged not by manipulation or fear, but by genuine affection and respect. The unraveling had begun, and this time, Elena wouldn't be able to stitch her lies back together. The truth, like his company's best medications, might taste bitter going down, but it would ultimately heal what had been poisoned. The war was far from over, but for the first time since finding those forged documents, Elijah Davis believed he might actually win. The San Francisco Superior Court felt like a cathedral of justice that Tuesday morning, its soaring ceilings and oak-paneled walls bearing witness to decades of legal battles. But for Elijah Davis, seated at the plaintiff's table with his attorney Rebecca Chen, a brilliant litigator Marcus had recommended, it felt more like a final battlefield, where everything he'd built would either be preserved or destroyed. Across the aisle, Elena sat composed and elegant in a navy suit that projected competence and concern. Her attorney Richard Blackwood was a specialist in elder law with a reputation for winning competency cases on behalf of David sat beside them, his face a mask of misery that he tried to disguise as somber concern. Elijah's heart ached seeing his son there, but the betrayal had calcified into acceptance. Some wounds could never fully heal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks, the bailiff announced. Judge Hendricks had a reputation for fairness and sharp intelligence. In her mid-50s, with graying hair and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, She commanded immediate respect as she surveyed the packed courtroom. The media attention had been intense. Pharmaceutical magnate fights family over mental competency made for compelling headlines. This is a petition for conservatorship filed by David Davis concerning his father, Elijah Davis, age 68, Judge Hendricks began. The petitioner claims Mr. Davis is no longer competent to manage his personal and financial affairs due to advancing dementia. Mr. Davis contests this petition. Counselor Blackwood, you may begin. Blackwood rose with practiced confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. This is a heartbreaking case of a family watching a beloved patriarch's mental capacity deteriorate, while he refuses to acknowledge his condition. We will present evidence of erratic behavior, poor decision-making, and cognitive decline that puts both Mr. Davis and his multi-billion-dollar corporation at risk. The first witness was Dr. Gerald Hoffman, a neuropsychologist Elena's team had hired. His credentials were impressive, his manner authoritative as he described cognitive assessments and brain scans that supposedly showed significant deterioration. In my professional opinion, Dr. Hoffman testified, Mr. Davis shows clear signs of moderate to severe dementia. His judgment is compromised, his memory unreliable. He requires immediate conservatorship for his own protection. Rebecca Chen's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Hoffman, how many times have you actually examined Mr. Davis in person? Well, once. But I had extensive documentation. Once, a single 90-minute session. And the extensive documentation you relied on? Who provided that? Mrs. Elena Davis supplied medical records and behavioral observations. Mrs. Davis, who is not a medical professional, provided your primary evidence base for declaring her father-in-law incompetent? Dr. Hoffman shifted uncomfortably. The observations were quite detailed, including edited audio recordings and selectively chosen photographs, correct? I was told they were authentic. The damage was done. Chen had methodically dismantled the foundation of the medical testimony, revealing its reliance on Elena's curated evidence rather than independent clinical assessment. David took the stand next, and Elijah watched his son struggle with words that had clearly been coached but felt like poison in his mouth. My father has been confused lately, forgetting conversations, making unusual business decisions. We're worried about his safety. Can you give specific examples of this confusion? Blackwood prompted. David's testimony felt rehearsed as he described incidents of Elijah appearing disoriented, forgetting family names, and making what he characterized as erratic business choices. But Chen's cross-examination revealed the careful editing of truth. Mr. Davis, you testified that your father forgot your wife's name at a family dinner, but isn't it true that he deliberately used her maiden name, Vasquez, rather than Davis? Yes, but a name he would only know if he remembered her quite clearly, including details from before her marriage to you? David's composure cracked slightly. Maybe, but the way he said it was hostile. Hostile towards someone he suspected of defrauding him. We'll return to that. You also mentioned erratic business decisions. But for Elijah Davis, seated at the plaintiff's table with his attorney Rebecca Chen, a brilliant litigator Marcus had recommended, it felt more like a final battlefield where everything he'd built would either be preserved or destroyed. Across the aisle, Elena sat composed and elegant in a navy suit that projected competence and concern. Her attorney, Richard Blackwood, was a specialist in elder law, with a reputation for winning competency cases on behalf of, quote, worried family members. David sat beside them, his face a mask of misery that he tried to disguise as somber concern. Elijah's heart ached seeing his son there, but the betrayal had calcified into acceptance. Some wounds could never fully heal. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hendricks, the bailiff announced. Judge Hendricks had a reputation for fairness and sharp intelligence. In her mid-50s, with graying hair and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, she commanded immediate respect as she surveyed the packed courtroom. The media attention had been intense. Pharmaceutical magnate fights family over mental competency made for compelling headlines. This is a petition for conservatorship filed by David Davis concerning his father, Elijah Davis, age 68, Judge Hendricks began. The petitioner claims Mr. Davis is no longer competent to manage his personal and financial affairs due to advancing dementia. Mr. Davis contests this petition. Counselor Blackwood, you may begin. Blackwood rose with practiced confidence. Thank you, Your Honor. This is a heartbreaking case of a family watching a beloved patriarch's mental capacity deteriorate while he refuses to acknowledge his condition. We will present evidence of erratic behavior, poor decision-making, and cognitive decline that puts both Mr. Davis and his multi-billion-dollar corporation at risk. The first witness was Dr. Gerald Hoffman, a neuropsychologist Elena's team had hired. His credentials were impressive, his manner authoritative as he described cognitive assessments and brain scans that supposedly showed significant deterioration. In my professional opinion, Dr. Hoffman testified, Mr. Davis shows clear signs of moderate to severe dementia, his judgment is compromised, his memory unreliable. He requires immediate conservatorship for his own protection. Rebecca Chen's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Hoffman, how many times have you actually examined Mr. Davis in person? Well, once, but I had extensive documentation. Once. A single 90-minute session. And the extensive documentation you relied on, who provided that? Mrs. Elena Davis supplied medical records and behavioral observations. Mrs. Davis, who is not a medical professional, provided your primary evidence base for declaring her father-in-law incompetent? Dr. Hoffman shifted uncomfortably. The observations were quite detailed, including edited audio recordings and selectively chosen photographs, correct? I was told they were authentic. The damage was done. Chen had methodically dismantled the foundation of the medical testimony, revealing its reliance on Elena's curated evidence rather than independent clinical assessment. David took the stand next, and Elijah watched his son struggle with words that had clearly been coached but felt like poison in his mouth. My father has been confused lately. Forgetting conversations, making unusual business decisions. We're worried about his safety. Can you give specific examples of this confusion? Blackwood prompted. David's testimony felt rehearsed as he described incidents of Elijah appearing disoriented, forgetting family names, and making what he characterized as, quote, erratic business choices. But Chen's cross-examination revealed the careful editing of truth. Mr. Davis, you testified that your father forgot your wife's name at a family dinner. But isn't it true that he deliberately used her maiden name Vasquez rather than Davis? Yes, but a name he would only know if he remembered her quite clearly, including details from before her marriage to you? David's composure cracked slightly. Maybe, but the way he said it was hostile. Hostile towards someone he suspected of defrauding him. We'll return to that. You also mentioned erratic business decisions. Can you specify what decisions you found concerning? He's been secretive. Meeting with people, making changes we weren't aware of. People like his physician, Dr. Sarah Kim, and his brother Marcus. Changes like securing his company's assets and consulting with legal experts about estate fraud. Each question drove wedges between the carefully constructed narrative Elena had built and the reality of Elijah's strategic response to discovering the conspiracy. David looked increasingly miserable as his testimony unraveled. When Elena took the stand, she was every inch the concerned daughter-in-law. Her voice carried just the right note of sadness as she described Elijah's decline and her family's difficult decision to seek conservatorship. It breaks my heart, she said, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. Elijah has been like a father to me, but we can't stand by and watch him hurt himself or destroy everything he's worked for. Mrs. Davis, Blackwood said gently, can you describe specific incidents that led to your concern? Elena's performance was masterful. A litany of supposed confusion, erratic behavior, and concerning statements that painted Elijah as a man losing his grip on reality. She spoke of finding him wandering the house at night, of business calls where he seemed not to recognize longtime associates, of increasing paranoia about people, quote, plotting against him. But Rebecca Chen had been preparing for this moment for weeks. When she rose for cross-examination, she carried a tablet loaded with evidence that would shatter Elena's carefully constructed image. Mrs. Davis, you've painted yourself as a loving daughter-in-law concerned about your husband's father. But isn't it true that you've been married twice before? Elena's composure flickered for just a moment. I don't see how that's relevant. Both previous husbands were significantly older and wealthy, weren't they? Objection, relevance, Blackwood called out. Goes to pattern and motive, Your Honor. Chen replied smoothly. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mrs. Davis. Yes, but… And both died in accidents, shortly after changing their wills in your favor? The courtroom stirred. Elena's lawyer had clearly not been prepared for this line of questioning. That's a coincidence. Is it also a coincidence that you approached Mr. James Morrison, Mr. Davis's attorney, with fabricated evidence of cognitive decline 6 months ago? I have no idea what you're talking about. Chen activated her tablet, and Morrison's voice filled the courtroom, a recording he'd made of his confession, insurance against Elena's retaliation. The audio detailed Elena's manipulation, the bribery, the forged documents. Elena's face went white as her own voice could be heard on the recording, discussing how to handle the old man's resistance to signing documents he didn't remember agreeing to. Your Honor, I object to this ambush, Blackwood began, but Judge Hendricks held up her hand. The witness may respond to the recording, if she chooses. Elena's mask had completely slipped now. Gone was the concerned daughter-in-law, replaced by a cornered predator. That recording is illegal. It's been edited, taken out of context. Much like the recordings you made of Mr. Davis's phone conversations, which you then edited to make him appear confused. Chen played another audio file, Isabella's testimony, given under oath and deposition, describing Elena's surveillance activities, her editing software, her conversations about eliminating obstacles to her inheritance. The courtroom was riveted as the full scope of Elena's conspiracy unfolded. Chen presented financial records showing Elena's massive debts, her history of fraudulent business dealings, the payments to Morrison that had cleared his gambling obligations. When Dr. Sarah Kim took the stand, her testimony was devastating to Elena's case. Mr. Davis has early-stage dementia, but his cognitive function during our sessions has been remarkably consistent. He shows no signs of the rapid deterioration described in Mrs. Davis's observations. In fact, his recall of recent events, particularly regarding family dynamics, has been exceptionally detailed and accurate. Marcus followed with testimony about Elijah's continued sharp business acumen, his strategic thinking in response to the discovery of fraud, and his methodical approach to gathering evidence, hardly the actions of an incompetent person. James Morrison's live testimony was the final nail in Elena's coffin. Pale and shaking, he detailed every aspect of Elena's manipulation, from the fabricated medical evidence to the forged signatures. He produced original documents, bank records, and correspondence that painted an undeniable picture of elaborate fraud. I was weak, Morrison concluded, his voice barely audible. I let my addictions cloud my judgment, and I betrayed a man who trusted me for 15 years. But I draw the line at murder. When Mrs. Davis began discussing more permanent solutions to the problem of Mr. Davis's resistance, I knew I had to come forward. Elena's attorney attempted damage control during redirect, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Judge Hendricks called for closing arguments, the courtroom was thick with tension. Blackwood's closing was brief and defensive, focused on discrediting the conspiracy theories and emphasizing David's genuine concern for his father. But his heart wasn't in it. The evidence had made his case untenable. Chen's closing was a masterpiece of controlled fury. She methodically laid out the evidence of Elena's pattern of targeting wealthy older men, her sophisticated fraud scheme, and her escalation to attempted murder when legal manipulation failed. This is not a case about an aging man's declining capacity, she declared. This is about a calculated predator who exploited genuine concerns about dementia to steal everything from a man who trusted her as family. The real question before this court is not whether Elijah Davis is competent to manage his affairs. It's whether we will allow a criminal conspiracy to succeed through manipulation of our legal system. Judge Hendricks retired for deliberation, but returned within an hour, unusually quick for such a complex case. Her expression was grim as she addressed the packed courtroom. This court finds that the petition for conservatorship is denied. Mr. Elijah Davis has demonstrated sufficient mental capacity to manage his personal and financial affairs. Furthermore, this court is compelled to note that the evidence presented suggests serious criminal conduct that will be referred to the district attorney's office for investigation. The gavel's bang echoed like a gunshot through the courtroom. Elena sat frozen as the implications sank in. Within minutes, Detective Sarah Molina was approaching the defense table with handcuffs. Elena Vasquez Davis, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. As Elena was led away, her composure finally shattered completely. She turned toward Elijah with naked hatred in her eyes. You think you've won, old man? You think your precious company will survive when everyone knows you can't trust your own mind? This isn't over. But it was over. The following week brought additional arrests, Drive, Hoffman for perjury and professional misconduct, and several co-conspirators in Elena's previous schemes that investigators had uncovered. David entered a plea agreement, testifying against Elena in exchange for immunity, though his relationship with his father remained shattered. James Morrison's legal career ended in disgrace, but his cooperation led to a reduced sentence, 2 years in minimum security prison and mandatory addiction treatment. He emerged from the courthouse a broken man, but perhaps not an irredeemable one. The restoration of Elijah's original will was a formality after the criminal convictions. Davis Pharmaceuticals implemented new governance structures to ensure smooth succession while protecting against future manipulation. A foundation was established in memory of Elijah's late wife, dedicated to preventing elder abuse and supporting victims of financial exploitation. 6 months later, as Elijah sat in his office reviewing the latest research on Alzheimer's treatments his company was developing to help others facing similar battles, he reflected on the price of victory. Elena would spend the next 25 years in prison. His son remained in therapy, trying to rebuild a relationship that might never fully heal. But the company was secure, his legacy protected, and the truth had prevailed. Sometimes, he thought, justice arrived not as a thunderclap, but as the steady accumulation of truth against lies. The fog of deception had lifted, revealing the solid ground of integrity beneath, and that, perhaps, was victory enough. The cherry blossoms in Golden Gate Park were in full bloom, their delicate pink petals drifting like snow across the walking path, where Elijah moved slowly but steadily with his walker. 6 months had passed since the trial, and while his dementia had progressed, as Dr. Kim had warned it would, he'd found an unexpected peace in accepting the rhythm of his changing mind. Some days were clearer than others, but today was one of the good ones, sharp enough for the conversation he'd been avoiding for too long. David waited on a bench beneath the flowering trees, looking older than his 42 years. The stress of the trial, the divorce proceedings, and the therapy sessions had carved new lines around his eyes. When he saw his father approaching, he stood uncertainly, unsure of his welcome. "Dad?" he said simply. "Son." Elijah settled onto the bench beside him, grateful for the rest. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching families with children play in the distance, both men grappling with how to bridge the chasm that Elena's manipulation had created between them. "I know sorry doesn't begin to cover it," David finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. Never wanted to steal from you. I was just so weak," Elijah finished gently. It wasn't cruel, just factual. An assessment stripped of anger by months of reflection and Dr. Kim's patient counseling sessions about forgiveness and family dynamics. David flinched but nodded. "Weak. Scared. Elena made me believe that you were getting worse faster than anyone realized, that we were protecting you from making decisions you'd regret. She was so convincing, so sure that she was saving the family from financial ruin." "She was very good at finding people's vulnerabilities," Elijah acknowledged. The therapy sessions had helped him understand the sophisticated psychological manipulation Elena had employed, not just on David, but on Morrison, on Dr. Hoffman, on anyone who stood between her and her goals. "But David, at some point, you had to know. Deep down, you had to know what she was doing was wrong." Tears tracked down David's cheeks. The night she talked about the break lines, when she said sometimes, natural solutions present themselves to persistent problems. "I knew then. God help me, I knew what she was planning, and I didn't stop her. I convinced myself she was just talking, just venting frustration. But I knew. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure could bear their weight. Elijah studied his son, really looked at him, and saw not the successful executive Elena had been grooming as her puppet, but the frightened boy who'd hidden behind his mother's skirts when thunderstorms rolled in from the Pacific. "Why didn't you warn me?" "Because I was a coward." David's voice broke completely. "Because I was terrified of her, of what she'd do if I crossed her. She had recordings of me agreeing to things, participating in planning sessions. She said if I betrayed her, she'd make sure I went to prison too. And I believed her." Elijah nodded slowly. Elena's web had been more intricate than even the trial had revealed. She'd made everyone complicit in small ways, gathering insurance against betrayal. "What changed? Why did you finally testify against her?" "When I saw you in that hospital bed after the accident. When I realized she'd actually tried to kill you." David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I kept thinking about Mom, about how she used to say that family was the only thing that really mattered in the end. And I'd chosen a stranger over the man who raised me, who taught me everything I know about integrity and honor." The mention of David's mother, Elijah's beloved wife Sarah, brought its own wave of complex emotions. She would have been devastated by what their family had become, but she also would have been the first to forgive, the first to find a path toward healing. "Your mother would have been proud of you for finally finding your courage," Elijah said quietly, "even if it took longer than it should have." They watched a young father teaching his daughter to throw a frisbee, her delighted laughter carrying on the spring breeze. The scene reminded Elijah of similar afternoons when David was young, before business pressures and personal ambitions had complicated their relationship. "I don't know if we can fix this," David said. "I don't know if you should even want to try. What I did, the betrayal, some things can't be undone." Elijah considered this carefully. His therapist had warned him that forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and that trust, once shattered, could never be fully restored to its original form. But perhaps it could be rebuilt into something different, more honest, less naive, but still meaningful. "I've been thinking about legacy a lot lately," Elijah said. "About what I want to leave behind. The company will survive and prosper. Marcus has seen to that. The foundation will help other families avoid what we went through. But you're my son, David, my only child, and your mother's son. That has to count for something. Even after everything? Especially after everything." Elijah turned to face his son directly. "You made terrible choices. You were weak when strength was needed, and that weakness nearly cost me my life and my legacy. But you also found the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most. That's not nothing." David's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I miss her so much, Dad. I miss Mom, and I miss who we used to be before Elena, before I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize." "We can't go back," Elijah said firmly. "The trust we had before, the easy relationship, that's gone. But maybe we can build something new. Something more honest, even if it's more fragile." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light filtered through the cherry blossoms. Finally, David spoke again. "What would that look like? Building something new? Family dinners. Real ones, not performances. Transparency about business decisions. You'll have input but not control until you've earned back the responsibility. And therapy. Lots of therapy. Together and separately." "And the company?" Elijah had given this considerable thought during the long months of recovery. "Marcus will serve as interim CEO when my condition progresses to the point where I can't continue. You'll work under him, learn from him, prove yourself again. If you can do that, if you can show that Elena's influence is truly gone, then we'll discuss your future role. That's more than I deserve. It's exactly what you deserve. A chance to earn back what you threw away. No guarantees, no shortcuts, but a genuine opportunity to prove you're the man your mother raised you to be." David wiped his eyes and managed a shaky smile. "She always said second chances were earned, not given. Sarah was a wise woman. Elijah's own voice grew thick with emotion. I think she'd want us to try to find our way back to being family. Real family, not the performance we've been giving for years. As the sun began to set over the park, painting the sky in soft pastels that complemented the cherry blossoms, father and son walked slowly back toward the parking area. The conversation had been painful but necessary, the first honest exchange they'd had in years. Dad, David said as they reached Elijah's car, where Marcus waited patiently behind the wheel. Thank you. For this chance. For not giving up on me completely. Elijah paused, his hand on the car door. Don't thank me yet. Thank me in a year, 5 years. When we see whether this fragile thing we're trying to build can actually survive. Real forgiveness isn't words, David. It's time and consistency, and proof that change is possible. I understand. Good. Then we'll start with dinner this Sunday. Just family. You, me, Marcus, Dr. Kim, and Isabella. The people who proved what loyalty actually means. As Marcus drove them home through the familiar streets of San Francisco, Elijah reflected on the difficult conversation. Healing wasn't a destination but a journey, and there would be setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the old pain would resurface unexpectedly. But today had been a beginning. Not a return to innocence, that was impossible, but perhaps a first step toward something more valuable. A relationship built on truth rather than illusion, on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty. The fog was beginning to roll in from the Pacific, but for once, Elijah wasn't worried about what it might obscure. He'd learned to navigate by different landmarks now, the steady presence of those who'd proven their worth, the quiet satisfaction of justice served, and the fragile but growing possibility that even broken families could find new ways to love. 1 year later, the memorial garden at Davis Pharmaceuticals bloomed with Sarah's favorite flowers, white roses and lavender that filled the courtyard with gentle fragrance. It had been Elijah's idea to create this space, a place where employees could find quiet reflection amid the bustle of developing life-saving medications. But today it served a more personal purpose, as family and friends gathered to honor not just Sarah's memory, but the bonds that had survived Elena's attempts to destroy them. Elijah sat in his wheelchair. The progression of his condition had made walking increasingly difficult, watching as Isabella arranged the memorial wreath with the same careful attention she'd brought to his household for 13 years. Her dedication had been recognized with a generous pension and the title of Family Care Coordinator, overseeing the new elder protection initiatives at the Davis Foundation. She would have loved this garden, Dr. Sarah Kim said, settling into the chair beside him. Now officially retired from her practice, she served as the foundation's medical advisor and had become like family to Elijah in ways that went beyond their professional relationship. Sarah always said healing happened best in beautiful spaces. She had strong opinions about most things. Elijah replied with a smile that carried decades of fond memories. His speech was slower now, more deliberate. But his mind remained clear during these precious windows of lucidity, including second chances and stubborn old men who didn't know when to accept help. The gathering was small but meaningful. Marcus stood near the fountain, deep in conversation with Rebecca Chen, who had become not just their family attorney but a trusted friend. She'd helped navigate the complex legal aftermath of Elena's conviction, ensuring that the company's governance structures would protect future generations from similar manipulation. David approached hesitantly, still uncertain of his welcome despite a year of family dinners and therapy sessions. He carried a small potted rose bush, a contribution to the memorial garden that he'd asked permission to make. The transformation in Elijah's son was remarkable but fragile, like new growth after a devastating fire. Dad, I brought the rose we discussed. The pink one, like the ones Mom grew in her garden when I was little. Elijah nodded approvingly. She always said pink roses were for gratitude and appreciation. Seems fitting. They'd all been through individual and family therapy, working through layers of betrayal, manipulation, and the complex emotions that Elena's conspiracy had unleashed. Dr. Patricia Wong, their family therapist, had warned them that healing would be a lifelong process, with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. The most difficult revelation had come 6 months ago, when investigators uncovered evidence that Elena had been systematically poisoning Elijah with small doses of scopolamine, a drug that enhanced confusion and memory loss. The periodic episodes that had seemed like natural progression of his dementia had actually been chemical attacks designed to strengthen her case for incompetency. Knowing this had brought relief, but also rage that took months to process. "Before we begin the memorial service," Elijah said, his voice carrying enough to gather the small group around him, "I wanted to share some news. This morning, the FDA approved our new Alzheimer's treatment for Phase 3 trials." The announcement brought smiles and quiet applause. The medication wouldn't help Elijah, his condition had progressed too far, but it might spare other families the anguish they'd endured. "Sarah always believed that our personal struggles could become sources of healing for others," he continued. "This treatment exists because we refuse to let Elena's betrayal define us. Because we chose to fight for truth and justice, even when it was difficult." Marcus stepped forward, his own eyes bright with emotion. "The company is in good hands, brother. David's been working under my supervision for the past year, and I'm proud to say he's earning back the trust he lost. The board voted yesterday to reinstate him as Senior Vice President of Research and Development." The announcement caught David off guard, and tears spilled down his cheeks. It was a significant step back toward the leadership role he'd nearly inherited before Elena's manipulation, but it came with accountability structures that would prevent future abuse. "I won't disappoint you again," David said, his voice thick with gratitude and determination. "Any of you. I promise that on Mom's memory." The memorial service itself was simple but profound. Each person shared a memory of Sarah, her laugh, her fierce loyalty to family, her insistence that problems were opportunities in disguise. Isabella spoke in Spanish, then translated her words. "Señora Sarah always said that families are not perfect, but love makes them whole. I think she would be happy to see love winning today." As the formal service concluded, people drifted into smaller conversations, but Elijah remained by the memorial stone, lost in memories. Dr. Kim sat with him, providing the comfortable silence that had become one of her greatest gifts to his declining years. "Any regrets?" she asked finally. Elijah considered the question carefully. "About Elena? About the betrayal? No. She showed us who she really was, and we responded with truth. That's all we could do. About David? This required deeper thought. The relationship with his son would never return to its former innocence, but it had evolved into something more honest, more aware of human frailty and the necessity of constant vigilance against moral compromise. David was weak, but weakness isn't unforgivable if it leads to growth. He's working every day to become the man Sarah raised him to be. That's enough. And the company? Your legacy?" Elijah smiled, watching Marcus and David collaborate on plans for the Memorial Gardens expansion. "The company will outlive us all. The treatments we're developing, the lives we'll save, the foundation that will protect other elders from what I experienced. That's legacy. Not the stock price or the quarterly reports, but the good we do in the world." As afternoon melted into evening, the gathering gradually dispersed. Isabella insisted on cleaning up, despite protests that it wasn't necessary. Marcus and David lingered, discussing research protocols with the easy collaboration that suggested healing was truly possible. Dr. Kim remained, as she often did, providing quiet companionship as Elijah's energy began to fade. "I have something to show you," Dr. Kim said, pulling out a tablet. "Elena's parole hearing was yesterday." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "She's been in prison less than 2 years. Denied, unanimously. The board cited her complete lack of remorse and evidence of continued manipulation attempts with other inmates. She won't be eligible for another review for 5 years. There was no satisfaction in Elena's continued imprisonment, only relief that she wouldn't be free to target other vulnerable families. The justice system had worked, but the real victory was in the healing that had occurred despite her destructive influence. "Dr. Kim," Elijah said as she prepared to leave, "I need to ask you something. About my condition, about what's coming." She settled back in her chair, ready for the conversation she'd known would come eventually. What do you want to know? How much time do I have? Not to live, but to be myself. To recognize the people I love. To make decisions that matter. Her expression grew gentle but honest. Months. Maybe a year. The progression has been slower than we initially feared, partly because we stopped Elena's poisoning, but also because you've kept your mind active, engaged in meaningful work and relationships. And when the time comes, when I can't manage my own care? We've already discussed this. Isabella will coordinate your care team, with oversight from Marcus and David. Dr. Wong will continue family therapy to help everyone navigate the changes. You'll remain in your home as long as possible, surrounded by people who love you. The conversation should have been frightening, but Elijah felt only peace. He'd faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged with his integrity intact. His company would continue its mission of healing. His family, though scarred, had found new ways to love each other. Most importantly, the truth had prevailed over deception. As the sun set over San Francisco, painting the Memorial Garden in golden light, Elijah closed his eyes and listened to the city's familiar sounds. Cable cars climbing Nob Hill, foghorns from the bay, the distant murmur of life continuing its eternal dance. He'd built something lasting here, not just in steel and glass and pharmaceutical patents, but in the relationships that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Sarah's rose bushes rustled in the evening breeze, their fragrance carrying memories of better days and promises of peace to come. The fog was rolling in again, as it did every evening, but Elijah no longer feared what it might obscure. He'd learned to navigate by the light of love and loyalty, by the steady presence of those who'd chosen to stand with him when standing had required courage. In the gathering dusk, surrounded by the evidence of his life's work, and the people who'd proven their worth when it mattered most, Elijah Davis found the peace that had eluded him during the dark months of betrayal and conspiracy. This was how legacies truly lived, not in wills and legal documents, but in the lives touched, the love shared, and the truth upheld even in the face of overwhelming deception. Elena had tried to steal his legacy, but she'd only succeeded in revealing what it truly was. And that legacy, built on integrity, tempered by hardship, and strengthened by forgiveness, would endure long after the fog lifted and the morning came again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,